thought I'd talk a little bit about research and what divides someone who's a historian and someone who tells lies for a living like me. Samuel Johnson is most famous for writing the first comprehensive dictionary of the English language. Once wrote, "The greatest part of a writer's time is spent in reading. In order to write, a man will turn over half a library to make one book. Presumably, the same would go for a woman." I'm certain that I didn't turn over anything like half a library when I was first researching my first book, which initially appeared in serial form in the Lincoln County Weekly Journal that's no longer with us, and I sincerely hope I didn't contribute to its demise. And I didn't turn over half a library, certainly not half the state library, where I did most of my researching the rest of my books. But I did turn over a good portion of the main historical, geographical, cultural sections. As a library, I provided three of my major research sources: formal histories, biographies, geographies, maps, volumes of yearly statistics. Then there are the 19th and 20th century town histories, which you can't take as, really straightforward history all the time. It's an awful lot of legend, folk stories, gossip, and these old town histories. What's wonderful about them is you find out what was important to these people. If they're telling a folk story about someone, that's something that was in the soup, so to speak, the cultural soup for them. Also books of regional folklore. And third was late 19th century newspapers, the Portland papers. There were three of them. It was the Eastern Argus, the Portland Courier, and the Portland Daily Advertiser, and they were all connected to political parties. Something's not changed. Anyways, the fourth and fifth sources the library didn't provide. I was able to point out the fourth once at a speaking event. Someone, Q&A session, was asked, "How long have you been researching these books?" I said, "All my life. I come from a storytelling family, and many an evening when family was visiting, sitting in the living room telling stories about their childhood or whatever, I would sit in the corner hoping no one would notice me and realize it was past my bedtime." So I was soaking up research for my writing long before I knew what research was. I'll give you a couple of instances where a very short story, if you stop and think about it, can give you a sense of different things in the culture that the story doesn't tell you about. It's direct. My mother's father and his twin brother were born in 1892. And the family tales that from that side stretched at least to their childhood, and in a couple of instances further back. So, like many people back then, music, like homemade music, was very important. People didn't have radios and TVs and record players and such. Lots of times, everybody in the household would be able to play an instrument. So just before the turn of the century, when my great-uncle, 8 years old, my great-grandparents, their farm in Edgecombe, took on a lodger, a teacher from a local schoolhouse, and part of his room and board was paid by violin lessons for the twins. So years later, my grandfather became locally known for being able to play everything. He played the horn, he played the guitar, he played the accordion. Kind of a jack of all trades, master of none when it came to music, so to speak. Certainly was able to join in with the family band, so to speak. My great-uncle Alvin was named after my real name's Alvin. Uncle Al, and people in town called Old Tom, for whatever reason. He concentrated on the violin and became the go-to fiddler at local dances and town events. He first played the fiddle at a dance unexpectedly at the age of 9. There were 3 brothers, the Brown brothers, who lived in an area of Edgecombe called Mount Hunger. And it was kind of the wrong side of the tracks. They were a rough bunch of guys, not well-meaning enough and everything, but they were pretty rough around the edges. There was a story, my Uncle Al told me, that one time someone at a dance said that they couldn't let anybody else in the town hall in Edgecombe because it was overcrowded already. So these 3 brothers, this wood stove was going and everything. They hauled the flue out, picked up that stove and brought it outside in the front yard and made a dance outside. So they were real characters. So my Uncle Al and his family were at a dance, and the music stopped. There was some conversation among the musicians, and someone kind of pointed towards the other side of the room. Uncle Al thought, it almost looks like they pointed at me. And one of the Brown brothers came walking out. He looked over at Uncle Al and he said, "The fiddler will only play till 10 o'clock. You have to take his place." My Uncle Al, 9 years old, said, "I'm not leaving this chair." "You don't have to." Picked him up, chair and all, carried him, set him in amongst the musicians, and that was his debut as a fiddle player. My grandfather, my Uncle Al's older brother, is 6 years older, was Irving. He was probably the tallest man in Edgecombe, Maine. He was 6'4", back then, really was tall. People thought he might be the strongest man. Some people thought he was one of the nicest. When he was almost at his height, all the young bucks in town were always testing his strength, challenging him with some knowledge. So he was with his mother, who was a small woman, and his 2 twin brothers, and they were at the post office and general store in what is Riley called Edgecombe City. A friend of mine from Pennsylvania once said, Edgecombe has a sign that says, "Entering Edgecombe" on both sides of the sign. And so anyways, they're at the post office and general store, and delivery of goods showed up, and these 2 guys came in rolling this great big pickle barrel, and they thought the end of it, and they lifted it back up. And one of the fellas said, Irving, I bet you $1 you can't pick that pickle barrel up and take it out onto the porch. Irving saw the barrel, porch. Then he turned to his mother and he says, "Ma, you want to put that on the counter so I can get a good hold of it?" And she did. And when they turned around, the guy had left the store and the $1 was sitting there. Well, back at the Maine State Library, starting in the early 90s, I could often be found with my head down over maps, biographies, town history, or squinting in both newspapers and on a microphone. If my characters were in a particular town or city, the old town histories would give me more local color and lore than I could ever use. As an example, treasures found in the history of Holloway turned out to be something I couldn't use for my first book, but that proved invaluable in the third. One was a legend of what was called the Smoking Pine, which was a great tall pine tree that was rumored, or people believed that it was inhabited by the spirit of a tribal chief, and it was smoking. It was a smoking pipe, and they couldn't figure out why it would give off this mist or smoke. And the other one was an epic snowball fight between 2 schools that I adopted and made, I think, pretty good use of in my phone. Each would become integral to that looks as well. But sometimes, well, let's say there's a historical novelist, I can't remember, I read it years ago, and he said, his advice, he said, write first, research afterwards. And I think his point was that if you didn't know enough to get at least close, maybe you shouldn't be writing about it. And that maybe the research would actually hinder you because you were trying to keep everything so close. I just found it the opposite, that my research just kept turning up such a great material. I don't know what I would have done with that. So, sometimes something I was specifically looking for wasn't there. History has gaps. One such thing, and a major issue for it, had to do with Portland Custom House. Yearbooks of data and statistics were on hand to show me just how much commerce and cargo through Portland during the age of sail and was impressive. And histories of the Maine coast and Portland, in particular, only added the sense of how vibrant and busy a place the city was. Well, one of my early scenes was to take place in the Portland Custom House. I couldn't find anything about how business was carried on there, how busy summer day might look inside the custom house. I always tried to walk when my characters walked. There are a few exceptions. And I made a trip to Portland to nose around the custom house. It's a gorgeous building. I understand they're starting to do tours there. And it's even more gorgeous inside. It's all this gold leaf, wood, brass fixtures, stylized dolphins, and balusters, and tile, beautiful black white tile floor, marble counter. It really is. It's just stunning. And so I went in there. There was no sign that said "Don't do not enter." So I went in, and the place seemed uninhabited. It was just silent. And some people were taking care of it and everything. So I gave myself a little quiet tour. And I felt, I got a feeling for the space. Seeing all these hard surfaces, tall ceilings, very echoey. But I still didn't quite get what I needed. What did it look like? On a busy summer day, ships would come in, captains were coming in with manifests, and the customs inspectors were talking about things. Anyways, now I've been very lucky to have some brilliant and generous mentors. One of whom was a local historian, Dean. One of the great local authorities in the history of Maine coast, Portland, and nautical matters. He wrote a wonderful book called The Snow Squall, the Last American Clipper Ship, which included his own adventures on an expedition to recover that vessel from the Falkland Islands. And parts of that ship were in the Maritime Museum of Bath, the Snow Squall. So Ned and other experts became my fifth source. Later on, I would call on them to corroborate unusual stories. When I finished the first draft of my second book, I gave the nautically connected chapters to a friend who had sailed on tall ships and who was himself a sturdy historian on the subject. He questioned the likelihood of one shipboard scenario, which was couched in the form of a newspaper story. He knew that I had a tendency to invent newspaper stories for my novels, writing them in the flowery style of the day. In his part of what he read, it said, Eastern Argus, October 12, 1896. One day last week, the coasting schooner, the Lava, came creeping into the harbor. Nothing special was thought about the matter until it was learned that Captain Amy, who was in charge of her, had sailed the vessel here from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, without any assistance whatever. It seems that Captain Amy's men deserted him at that port, and his captain said to a friend who inquired about the matter that he would be damned if he was going to ship the two two crews. He consequently took his chances on sailing the vessel to Portland alone, and as there is a providence to watch over two very large classes in society, drunks and fools, he arrived in safety, as previously stated. Now, there's more to the story, but my friend balked at the idea that someone sailing a ship himself was important. But as it happened, the passage he doubted was taken verbatim out of the newspaper. And there was more to the story that added an element of mystery to the plot that I just didn't want to let go. So I queried Nick about it. And he showed an aspect of his character that I admired. The expert didn't mind saying, I don't know. Boy, was he curious. I thought that was the end of it. But a couple of days later, he called back to tell me that he'd been talking to Roger Duncan, who wrote the classic Coastal Maine on maritime history. Extraordinarily wonderful book. It's so well written. Mr. Duncan said that no one would have advised a captain to do such a thing, but it had been known man, if rarely. So I pressed on, being sure to address the issue in the author's note on the back of the book, in case anybody else thought it was not likely. When I was writing the fifth Boothbay adventure, Moss Farm, which actually takes place between the first and the second, I pulled out some notes from my earliest researches, and included a story I forgot about. I called Nick again, and explained that I had read an account of the 1813 battle between the Boxer and the Enterprise, as seen from Edgecombe Heights. This was an extraordinary event, really. The Enterprise was the first Enterprise, U.S. Enterprise, and we've had an Enterprise in our Navy ever since. It's always been an Enterprise. It was Captain Kirk, too, right? So they were actually in Portland, in harbor, and they heard cannon fire. What it was the Boxer was a British ship, and they were in the vicinity. And someone came rolling out from Mohegan Island, and they let them on. We were at war. It was War of 1812. And they said, we have something really sick on the island. You have a doctor. So the captain allowed the doctor to go to the island. And when the doctor came back, the Boxer fired a shot as a salute, kind of, to, bye-bye, Well, they heard the shot in port. And Enterprise crew took on, and it was a terrific battle. And it was, the Enterprise won. Both captains were killed, and they are now buried side by side on Montjoy Hill. And the captain of the British ship, this is an extraordinary thing, the captain of the British ship had a paper in his pocket, and it was a letter of debt that he had not paid. And the American sailors all chipped in and put coins in his pocket to pay it off, so that his family back in England would never live. And so when the British were allowed to take the body, and his things and everything, they found all these coins and everything. Kind of amazing story, really.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I called Nick again, explained that I read an account of the 1813 battle between the Boxer and the Enterprise, as seen from Edgecombe Heights. Edgecombe Heights is a long ways up the peninsula, and we're talking not just up the peninsula, but we're going out to sea to maybe 5 miles out or something. So I thought, is that kind of true? Legend, exaggeration? So I knew that Nick and Roger Duncan had put paid to the story that people had watched the battle between the Boxer and Enterprise from the Portland Observatory. And they had done, taken the height of the observatory, the curvature of the Earth, said, They would have heard the cannons. Maybe they would have seen smoke from the battle, but they didn't see the battle. So I thought it was a good guy to talk to about this. So, once again, Dick's curiosity was piqued. 2 or 3 days later, I got a call from him. He said that he'd done the math, and considering the deforestation of the coast of the town, he believed that if someone with nautical knowledge had an excellent spyglass, they might have been able to tell who won the battle. They never mentioned that. So, again, I was able to use something in my, actually, it's kind of a ghost story too. But this was all later on. While I was investigating my first book, while I was trying to find the description of business in the Port Custom House, I was still young in my researching and hadn't realized what a resource snake was. So I turned to newspapers. Reading old journals on microfilm wasn't ideal. Rolling the film on the microfilm machine, looking for a particular date or a page, give you motion signals. And it wasn't quite like having a physical paper for the world of the day spread out in front of you. You open up a newspaper, one thing, something else catches your eye. You are in the world. Sometimes even then, with the microfilm, I was looking for the waterfront news and an interesting item in society column. On the same page would catch my eye, advertisement, some squid on politics, or maybe a hunting expedition up north. One story that I've never been able to use had to do with the greenback silver standard bearer party. That was a real party. And they had and they were fairly strong, because the whole idea about silver, and kind of the preacher that preached against the gold standard. Thank you so much. You will not crucify me on a cross of gold. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Anyways, there was an account in one of the papers about these greenback silver standard bearers, I think I'm saying that right, having a convention in Saco. And a guy got up to speak to them who had just become part of the party. And he weren't too sure that he had anything to tell them. He got a little disgusted because they were sort of putting him down. And he said, look, I voted your ticket last election, and you paid me good money to do it. And someone said, kill him. And he ended up diving out a back window as he was being rushed. Now, in 2 of the papers that's written about, in the one that was the organ of the greenback silver standard bearers, you didn't hear a thing about it. But I've never been able to use that. Who knows, maybe one of these days. Anyways, so my first book takes place in July of 1896. And while I was reading the July 3rd edition of one of the papers looking for events planned in Portland for Independence Day, I wanted to really point out just how big these people did Independence Day. When I fell on the news or the list of events for South Freeport, okay, long fireworks, and then a sentence that I had to scan several times to make sure I was reading it right, and it said, Mrs. Roberto will repeat her famous parachute jump from an ascended balloon in her attractive suit of tights. And I said, the Moose Path League's going to South Freeport. Gentlemen of the club, very shy around women, but they don't want to see that attractive suit of tights. And I couldn't find anything else about Mrs. Roberto except that her husband had died parachuting out of an ascended balloon. So, which was maybe a good thing in that instance, because I could make of her what I wanted. And eventually she became the title character of my fourth book. Anyway, so, but even though I'm scouring the waterfront news, reading the names, sometimes the very number of ships coming and going, or many of them carrying in and out of the harbor, still found nothing in Italy about how business was done at the custom house. It became a little bit of an obsession. And it was really one of the only gaps I was finding early on. So if I had been writing history, I might have just kept looking further, deeper. But I was writing a story, fiction, and I had come to the point where I needed to fish or cut bait. I had to imagine what a busy day at the custom house was like. I had to conjecture. I had to fill in the gap. I had to write what I knew I was writing about. And this is part of what I wrote. James and Marcia Underwood are actually coming to custom house to playing the sea trunk of his brother, who had passed away or something, and had just caught up. As James and Marcia stepped from the street of the custom house, their senses were assailed with the thunder of business within. The smokes of many cigars and pipes were accumulated in a blue haze. The shouts and orders that echoed in the cavernous interior had more of the quality of the barking of dogs than the speech of men. To the unschooled eye, all was chaos. Captains of ships, captains of industry coming and going between bouts of gesticulating activity, inspectors mulling over cargo manifests or stamping documents with their official approval, messengers scurrying between correspondents. I went on, hoping to suggest some of the possible problems and confusions that the head customs inspector, Mr. Pugh, might have faced. There were lines before each of the clerk windows, and a clerk standing at the bottom of the stairs who called out, "Mr. Pugh, there is discrepancy in one line item of the Humboldt's cargo list." "After working here a while, Mr. Murney," said the inspector, "you will find that most manifests need some adjustment. If only a single item is off, Captain Pelf has made a good account indeed. Does it amount to more than 5% of said item?" inquired the inspector. Mr. Murney stared into his eyebrows in search of a calculation. Then his face cleared and he said, "Yes, sir," he called out above the general din. "Does it look like contraband?" "Contraband? Might he be harboring distillates, drink man, alcohol?" "It's pigs, sir. Pigs. Small ones. Pound-wise, it might not be more than 5%. "What are you talking about, Mr. Murney? There were 3 litters born since they left Charleston." "Charleston pigs," said Mr. Pugh, as if committing the phrase to memory. "Pigs do have litters, don't they?" asked the clerk. "You can't stop them, Mr. Murney. Record the discrepancy is acquired in transit." "In transit? It's either that or an act of God." The clerk frowned, shook his head before hurrying back to his desk in the bustling main room. "Charleston pigs," said Mr. Pugh again before continuing up the stairs to the second floor. And so, carrying on in this vein, it stood and stands. I thought and thought about it, worked hard to get it down in a way that I hope would seem both reasonable and, for my purposes, mildly comic. But I was a little worried that someone would know better and tell me so. The serialized installment took place at the Portland Custom House. The serialized installment that took place at the Portland Custom House was published on a Wednesday. Thursday morning, my phone rang. I knew the answer. Van. Yes. Nickname. Hi there. How are you? I'm okay. I just read your chapter that takes place in the Portland Custom House. Oh. I think Nick knew what was probably going through my mind. It was odds. And he said, I think you got it spot on. And I think you made it all up. Thank you.